Okay, so I think we can get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Elizabeth Pendergrass, and I'd like to welcome all of you to today's webinar, Taking Software Estimation and Planning to a Higher Level. Before we get started, I'd like to make you aware of a few technical items. All of you who are listening to the presentation are currently on mute. So to ask a question at any point during this presentation, just use the Q&A dialog box shown on the right-hand side of your WebEx screen. Keith will field as many of these questions as he has time for at the end of the presentation. But if he doesn't get to your question, don't worry. I will save all of the questions we don't get to and refer them to Keith so he can get back to you. So I'll start by introducing our presenter today. Keith Ciacco has more than 30 years of experience working in customer service, with 23 of those years spent at QSM. As Vice President, his primary responsibilities include supporting the QSM client base with their software measurement goals, managing business development, and managing existing client relations. He has developed and directed the implementation of the sales and customer retention process within QSM and played a leading role in increasing the size of its customer base. So without further delay, I'll let Keith get started.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I'll start by saying that technology companies spend millions of dollars each year developing and delivering software. The planning for this usually starts with senior level management asking very tough questions about cost and schedule types of targets and goals. The project managers then try to come up with estimates on the time and the effort that it'll take to deliver each of those projects. The estimates they usually end up being based on best guesses or experience-based types of effort numbers, and they try to do it for each person on the project. So they'll try to roll up these effort numbers for each release or each project or each deliverable, and they'll usually try to tally it up in a spreadsheet to come up with the overall portfolio estimates. The problem with doing it this way is that it usually takes a long time to do, and it can be at least very inaccurate, since the methods do not often take into account a lot of the complexities that we see in software development. Things like the nonlinear relationships that we see, the integration costs, and the overall overhead that it takes to deliver these types of projects. Then what often happens is the estimates are off, and then millions of dollars are spent trying to change course to try to make things right. With our customers, we support planning with top-down estimation, meaning we leverage empirically based models and historical data to generate the estimates with really just a minimal amount of information available, because usually when we're starting a project, there is not a lot of information available. So we implement this top-down estimation approach, and we do it very early in the planning process, even before any detailed planning takes place. We take a scientific approach to set those overall release and portfolio targets so we can avoid going down the wrong path. These methods that we use are data-driven, and they're backed by over 40 years of research and development. So we feel comfortable delivering this way. Today, what I'm going to do is walk you through some of the estimation processes and techniques that we use to help our customers, and I'll even show some examples using our estimation tools. I'll also try to leave some time at the end if you have any questions. And I know we have a big audience today, so hopefully we'll get to all the questions. If not, then feel free to reach out to me afterwards, and I'm happy to either schedule a call or answer questions over email. Let's start by giving a little background on QSM, the company that I work with. 42 years in business. This is our 42-year anniversary, and our main focus is we help our customers basically do what we're going to show today on this webinar. We help them do a better job of estimating and planning very early in the planning process, even before detailed planning takes place. The way we do it, like I mentioned, is we leverage empirically based models, we leverage industry data, and we leverage customer history as well. And we try to figure out the big picture first before any detailed planning takes place. And I'm going to take you through some examples and show you how we do this. The reason we can do this, and the reason why we have the ability to help our clients in this way, and really the reason for this webinar, is we do a ton of research in software. We've been doing it for a long time. We have a very large industry database. It's got over 13,000 projects. It's the QSM industry database. We use it to help our clients do a better job of trying to plan what the cost and the schedule and effort are going to be on their software projects. So by studying this data, it gives us a very good understanding of the relationships in the data on these software deliverables. People ask me all the time, where does the data come from? So where it does not come from is we don't put a form on the website and people kind of fill it out, haphazardly and without really knowing who's filling it out. What we do is we work with our clients, and that's where the data comes from, our client partnerships. So people that we work with in the consulting area and people that use our tools by permission, of course, they provide information that we can use to do the validation of the models and to provide the customer support that we do in the estimation area. We go through a very strict validation process. We make sure all the information is consistent and complete. And that means having size information, time and effort, reliability, and productivity information on each of the projects. So let's talk about some of the delivery challenges that we face, and then we're going to talk about how we try to overcome them. Delivery challenge number one. Usually, as you all probably know, we oftentimes have a very short time frame to make our decisions. We have to make resource allocation decisions. Where are we going to allocate these people? Should we take them off this project, and which project should they move to? How are we going to react to that backlog of work that we have to do? Things like that. How are we going to react to the boss when he tries to make a go or no-go decision on the project? How are we going to react on a proposal that needs to be out by tomorrow? Things like that. So short time frame to make decisions. Usually there's minimal information available, right? So sometimes when we start a project, we don't have a lot of information on the project. Maybe we're working with a new client, or maybe we're working on a new technology or something like that. So minimal information available is a challenge. Number three, unrealistic cost and schedule targets. How many times have you had a situation where someone told you that you had to get done in a certain amount of time, and you knew going in that it was an unrealistic schedule target or budget target? That happens all the time. So we're going to talk today about how we can, some methods really to try to help us overcome those unrealistic cost and schedule types of targets. Number four, demand goals are often not balanced with capacity. Happens all the time. We sign up to a schedule or a budget that we need to meet for a customer, but then we realize we don't have enough people to deliver it. So then we have a short time frame to make those reallocation decisions, like I mentioned a second ago. Number five, politics. Happens all the time, and there's really no way to avoid all politics, but at least we can mitigate the political sensitivities and try to work through them. And the reason why we can do this is because we use a data-driven approach. We try to take the subjectivity out of the decision making. And so political sensitivities is a big deal that we face, and we'll talk about that a little bit today as well. And then number six, no big picture analysis available. And this happens all the time. People that we've worked with, they'll spend a long time, maybe hours or days, doing a very detailed, granular plan. Like I mentioned earlier, they'll do a bottom-up, how many hours is each person going to work, roll it up in a spreadsheet type of plan, but they don't really know the big picture. They don't know, is this going to be, what's the scope? Is this going to take 3 months, or is it going to take 6 months? Do we need 10 people, or do we need 20 people? So no big picture analysis is one of the challenges that we face as well. The way we meet these challenges is through better estimating processes, and top-down estimation is what we're going to talk about today. So 3 main steps. Step number 1, we want to be able to analyze data if it's available. We want to leverage it when we run our estimates. And not only, one of the best practices that we encourage is to capture your own historical data. That's rule number one, if you can do it. But wouldn't it also be nice if we had some industry benchmarks to use as well? When we go and do that proposal or we have to deliver that project for the client, wouldn't it be good to know what the typical cost and schedule information is for that type of project? A lot of times we don't have that information available. So that's one of the ways that we can overcome some of those delivery challenges. We want to analyze our own data. We want to have a place to put it so we can use it repeatably, and we want to be able to rely a little bit on industry benchmarks as well. Step number 2, we want to be able to develop early release estimates based on this data, and we want to be able to use models to manage the uncertainty. So one of the reasons why we're able to do a top-down estimate with just a little bit of information is because it's model-based. It's science-based, like we hear a lot on the news today, except it's science-based for software development. Because we have these empirically based models, we can afford to only know a little bit about the project going in, because we can leverage that, we can manage that uncertainty and leverage the industry data as well as our own history. So, for example, we can plan for our development team to a 50% schedule, but condition the customer to a 90% schedule. So that's one of the ways that we'll show today of how we can manage that uncertainty. Step number 3 is the portfolio assessment. This is another way we're going to overcome those 6 challenges that I mentioned. We want to be able to, first, after we get those release estimates going and we feel comfortable, we want to be able to aggregate them into a portfolio view so we can do some initial analysis on the portfolio, but also have the flexibility to adjust for any types of risky projects that are coming up. We want to be able to aggregate these types of analysis because we want to be able to budget for next year. We want to be able to budget for 2 years from now. If we have one big project that we're working on, great. We might have a group of projects. So we want to be able to assess the risk, not only at the release level, but also the portfolio level. And we want to have the flexibility to adjust multiple times. So if we've made adjustments at the release level, that could throw the overall portfolio scope to the side, and so maybe we don't have enough people to adjust to meet those constraints. So we have to be able to adjust again and again, and the way to do that is by having some data-driven processes in place for estimating. So let's take a deeper dive. Step number 1, data analysis. Let's look at historical data, right? I mentioned that a second ago. That's going to be best practice. We thoroughly encourage pulling together some history. And we don't need a lot of historical data. If we can just get a handful of projects that we've completed, and we can capture how much work was delivered, how much effort was spent, how long the project took, that goes a long way. And on the chart here we see, ideally it would be great to have 8 to 15 projects pulled together. But you know what? If you have 1 or 2, that's great too. And another thing to note would be that we don't need a lot of granular information on the project. In fact, Larry Putnam, if you look QSM up on the internet and you looked up our tools, the SLIM models, software lifecycle management, you might have also seen them referred to as the Putnam model. So Larry Putnam started QSM many years ago, and he actually developed the models. Of course, we keep current today to today's technologies, and he wrote a number of books on streamlining the estimating process, and he talked about the metrics that we should focus on to do better estimating. And we're going to talk more about that today during the webinar. But in summary, it's going to be things like how much work was delivered, how much effort was spent, how long did the project take, and how many people were on the project, things like that. So we want to streamline the estimating process. We want to capture as many projects as we can, but we don't have to be very granular. We can stay relatively macro level. The reason why we do this is because it makes the estimation and planning process objective. It'll help us manage some of those political sensitivities that I mentioned earlier in the earlier slide. The next thing we want to do is we want to analyze our resource data, and we want to do it historically, and we want to do it currently. What the people that we have available now, we want to be cognizant of the skill levels and the experience level of the people. In this chart right here, we can see we have an effort rate chart here, and you can see the gradual adding on of people and effort, and the gradual taking off, reallocating. And you can see it's broken out by role, by month. By seeing these types of charts on projects that have already been completed, this will help us plan more effectively for projects that we have coming up down the road. And so we'll talk more about this as well during the webinar today. Also, these charts are going to vary based on the type of projects we're working on. And we can tailor these based on the development process that you're working in. Whether you're, and a lot of our clients are agile, and a lot are not doing agile. So we can work with all of the above and anything in between. So the important thing is to be flexible and consistent. Next thing we want to focus on is leveraging sizing data if it's available. And this is really important, and it's also probably the biggest challenge that people face when they're trying to do a good job of planning and estimating. What we'd like to do is collect size artifacts early in the planning process. And you can see on this slide that I've got a few of them named here. We've got user stories and epics and features. So if you're doing agile types of projects, those are usually the most popular. And then whether you're doing agile or non-agile, it's all important. We want to be able to be consistent in the sizing information that we capture if we can. And a lot of times when we talk sizing or we ask how big, people will say, well, it's 6 months big, or it's $10 million big, or it's 20 people big. And that's okay too, but we'd really like to get to the scope, the actual work that needs to be delivered as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that during the webinar. So leverage sizing data, very important. The next thing we want to do is we want to leverage that data while we're doing our estimates. And one of the most important things to doing a good job on this would be to be able to customize the estimates to the way you do business. And you can see here on this slide, I've actually got one of the dialog boxes from the SLIM tools that I mentioned, right, the QSM tools. You can see here that we have the ability to customize this particular estimate to however you define a phase or a milestone or a sprint or a program increment. So you want to have the flexibility to customize the planning and estimating based on how you deliver your work in your environment. We want to be able to leverage any available resource, scope, and productivity information. Here you can see that we're looking at, in this example, we're looking at using stories for scope. So in this example, we're actually putting in how much work needs to be done on this particular project. We need to be able to measure or have some measure for productivity. We're calling it a PI here. And we want to have the flexibility to allocate our to define the way we allocate our resources in our estimating approach. In fact, let me just show one other slide here quickly. I mentioned Larry Putnam. This is just a very high level view of the software production equation that he actually invented. And this is really the model that gives us that flexibility to approach estimates from different angles based on the information we have available. And you can see here what we're really doing is we're linking size, effort, time, and that productivity factor that I mentioned a second ago. So if we only have part of the equation, we can solve for the other part. And you're going to see this is going to make a lot more sense as I take you through the webinar. But I just wanted to note this. This is part of the Putnam model, the software production equation that actually defines the model within SLIM that I'm going to show you today. So that productivity index is really calculated based on our historical data. Once we know how much work was delivered and how much effort was spent and how long the project took, we can calculate that productivity index because of that software production equation that I just briefly showed you there on that slide. So this just gives an example of some of the, we need 3 or 4 things, right? Top-down estimating. I don't know how many hours each person's going to work. I might have 30 people that I'm thinking about, but I don't have that feeling for how many hours each person's going to work. I'm going down a new path, and I just have a little bit of information. We're going to leverage that here in these examples. Now, we want to have the flexibility to pivot. So if I don't have sizing information, or I don't have one aspect of that model that I just showed, that software production equation, we want to have the flexibility to pivot to something higher level, right? Taking estimation to a higher level here. So in this example here, we're just showing a picture of a ROM estimate, rough order of magnitude, and it just kind of defines. I'm showing this because it's very straightforward. It tells us what we do know going in this example. We would know the scope. We would know if this is a big project or a small project, and then what we can figure out is how long the project's going to take and how much effort is going to be spent. Okay. Now, this is one approach. There's multiple approaches, and I'm going to show you more detail as we go through this. But the idea is to be able to put a little bit of information in and to be able to generate the release level estimates based on that data that we pulled together, and then based on just a little bit of a few bits of information on the project that we know going in. Now, in this slide, we're just showing the output of an estimate, and we're looking at, and in a few minutes, I'm going to take you live through the tools and show you some examples. I'll go through a case study briefly as well. But in this example, we're looking at the output of an estimate. And this is actually an Agile estimate. It's actually from a Scrum team where we've actually delivered the project. It's saying that we're going to deliver the project in 10 sprints. It's going to take about 4.7 months, 6,700 person hours of effort, and it's going to cost about $1 million to deliver. Right? So a little summary there of the estimate. It gives us a risk assessment to the right there on the bottom of your screen. It's going to tell us what chance we have of getting done on time and what chance we have of achieving our budget. And then it's got a control panel to my left, which is going to give us the flexibility to look at different trade-offs, right? You know, what's the impact of adding people, or what's the impact of adding more work from the backlog, things like that. And I'm going to take you through some live examples here in a few minutes. But I just wanted to give you kind of a big picture view first, to give you a feel for the type of outputs you can have with just a little bit of information and a little bit of analysis before going down the estimating path. Now, once we generate an estimate, we want to use that to negotiate. And this is what a lot of people miss, you know, when you talk about estimating, the whole negotiation part of it, right? You know, when Agile first became popular, we heard some people say, oh, well, you know, I don't need to estimate now because I already know how much it's going to cost. Right? And how many times have we heard that? But I can tell you, just from doing this a long time, we have a ton of customers that are doing Agile, and they still use our tools because they need to know, you know, is that fixed cost and schedule realistic, and how much scope do I need to deliver? And by the way, I need to get the stakeholders on board early. I can't wait 6 months or 6 weeks down the road till the first sprint is done to have the stakeholders on board, because then that throws everything off. Okay, I've even had people tell me, well, you know, estimating great, you know, but, you know, sometimes the estimates get thrown out because the stakeholder, you know, decides later they need to readjust. But if we get the stakeholders on early, that problem is mitigated, right? So the whole idea behind estimating is to do a better job of negotiating, being able to look at multiple scenarios. What's the best cost? What's the best schedule? What's a combination of both? And then being able to sanity check your work with historical data and with industry data, if you can. So main point here is let's improve our negotiation capability. Let's not just think of it as estimating. Let's think of it as a communication vehicle. And then I always show this slide on all my presentations, I think, because I think it's probably the most important slide. Understanding the impossible zone. Avoid signing up to things that are not possible. And this is really important because this is, I think, where most software or a lot, I don't know about most, but a lot of software development teams sign up to schedules and budgets that are very impossible. And the reason why they do it is because they don't have this big picture view early on in the negotiating process. So here on this slide, we're looking at, this is actually a cluster of data from the QSM database. Projects that have been completed, and you can see on the vertical we've got time, and then on the horizontal we have size. So it's basically telling us that as the projects get bigger, they're going to take longer. You can see kind of a gradual slope here in the data. And then in big bold red, you see the impossible zone. And this is what really, you know, what good estimating helps us avoid. It helps us avoid this impossible zone. And this means not only on in-house projects, but if you're working with vendors and a vendor comes in with a bid down in this impossible zone, then you know right off the bat that that's probably not a good choice. And you can use this type of analysis to negotiate with the vendor or with the in-house team or with the stakeholders to avoid losing a ton of money down the road. Okay, step 3, portfolio assessment. Right, we're comfortable with our releases. We've sanity checked them with industry data. We've got the stakeholders on board. Now we want to make sure that we have the budget available to deliver next year or this year or for our group of projects. So the first thing we want to do is we want to analyze that initial portfolio that's submitted, and we want to look for release estimates that are risky, because if one estimate is off, even if it might look good by itself, then it can throw the whole portfolio off. Number 2, we want to make adjustments for the risk and the waste, and we want to have the flexibility to replan if needed. So if one or two of those projects are risky, we want to be able to go back and reassess those for the greater good, so to speak. And then we want to have the flexibility to continue making changes if needed to make sure that we have the capacity to deliver always. This is actually a case study to show you briefly here. And these charts here come from the SLIM tools that I mentioned, software lifecycle management, the Putnam model, right? On this, you can see here that this particular client, this is someone we actually worked with, had a peak spending of $2.2 million, and they had a peak staffing of 218 people, and that was all good because that met the capacity constraints. It also met the budget. Everything was good. But then when we were working with this customer, we took a little bit of a closer look, and we noticed that if you look down on the bottom right of the screen, some of their projects were risky. You can see on the chart here, we've got top left of this chart, projects high risk. So these, and you can see on the vertical here, this is productivity measurements here, right? As you're going up the chart, higher productivity. And you can see here that these releases, they might have looked good by themselves in a vacuum, but when you compared them to the rest of your portfolio, they were risky. We assumed too high of a productivity, and therefore a schedule that was too aggressive. And then down here, we assumed too low of a productivity, so we weren't aggressive enough. And so these projects are hanging out. And knowing what we know, we advise this customer to go back and reassess, because one project in the portfolio gets canceled or doesn't hit its targets and throw the overall organization into a loop, a negative loop. So we want the flexibility to go at a bird's eye view, right? Not going into a detailed spreadsheet, not going into your PPM tool, right? We want to, at a bird's eye view, we want to look at some analysis quickly to see what's feasible and what's not. What can we do? And this goes back to that slide, quick decisions, right? Having the flexibility to do quick decisions. We want to look at, from a bird's eye view, the staffing on each of those releases, what the productivity measurements are, and how much work is planned for each of those releases so we can make decisions and make adjustments on the fly. Now, in this example with this customer, we made some adjustments, and you can see on the bottom right of your screen now, everything looks pretty good, right? All those projects fit within what we call this green target zone. You can see it barely probably on the slide here. There's a rectangle that signifies our comfort because we've achieved it in the past. And you can see that all the project estimates fit nicely into that target now, so that was great. The problem now, though, was, or the problem then, it was that when we made those adjustments at the release level, it threw the portfolio off because it made us have to increase our capacity. Spending went up to $2.7 million, and we ended up having to add people, or at least we had not added them at the time, but the forecast was we need to add people. And so we were able to see that, great on the release level, but now it affected the portfolio in a negative way, only because we didn't have the capacity to deliver. That gave us pause, and we had to go and renegotiate with the stakeholders. But because we had a data-driven process, because we had support of the stakeholders, because we negotiated with them early and they were on board from the start, we were able to have good conversations, reduced political sensitivities, and we were able to make some decisions. So things that we were able to consider, we considered eliminating projects. We considered slipping the start date on some of the projects. We considered adjusting the staffing up or down. and we considered renegotiating the cost and scope. The important thing on this slide, though, to note is that we were able to lean on the data. So that was huge, and we were able to renegotiate and make adjustments. And you can see here that what we did in yellow, it's explained in yellow, is we did not have to eliminate any projects. Instead, we took 5 projects, we delayed them by 3 months. We had 3 projects where we implemented some modest staff reductions, and we were able to look good at the release level, and we were able to save this customer a lot of money and a lot of pain down the road, a lot of anxiety, planning problems down the road, and implementation problems. So here you can see we were able to get the portfolio back to that $2.2 million range, and the capacity back to what we have as far as what they had on staff. So we didn't have to change. We didn't have to hire more people. And and these analytics provide a lot of different types of views. I'm going to show you some live in the tools in a second here, but I just wanted to show this one because in addition to managing demand with capacity, it also lets us see once at the big level, do we have enough people, and then making sure we do. It also lets us see when people become available again. You can see here this chart here is a demand curve, and it's looking at staffing on the vertical. People are, as we increase people, and then when people start becoming available again. And it's broken out by different skill categories or roles. For example, you can see the developers are in purple, right? So you can see the increase, and then as they become available again. So these curves can actually help us plan not only for the portfolio that we're in, but future budgeting for years 2, 3, 4, etc. Before I get into the tools, the live part of this, I just wanted to summarize some of the stuff we've talked about. Benefits to what we've just discussed. Number 1, balancing demand with capacity. Right, I showed you a couple examples of that. Number 2, it helps us get the right cost and the right schedule. Right, so we don't spend days doing a detailed plan to the overall big picture that's incorrect. We want to make it correct early so we know the target's right. Saves us a ton of time. We can do the what-if analysis within a few minutes. It'll take a little while, of course, to generate create the template. But once you have it's set up for your project environment, then you're set. You can keep readjusting and reassessing your project throughout the deliverable. It allows for early decision making. As you saw, we only knew 3 or 4 things about the project. And so it allows for early decision making when only a little bit of information is available, and it can help us go down the wrong avoid going down the wrong path. Top-down estimation helps us manage the risk and the uncertainty. And now this here, the account integration here takes into account the integration. This line here is really one of the most important things to me, because a lot of people we talk to, they use spreadsheets and things like that, and spreadsheets don't always tell the whole story. So these top-down estimation tools take into account the integration, the overhead, and the nonlinear relationships that are not modeled well with bottom-up types of spreadsheets and homegrown and gut feel and kind of guessing at things. For example, if I'm doing an estimate in a spreadsheet and the customer or the boss or the manager says, "Hey, don't worry, let's add 20 people. We'll get it done on time." The spreadsheet estimate might say that's a good idea, right? Because it's very linear. But if we put that into a top-down, empirically based, data-driven, science-based estimation tool, it's going to probably tell us that we're probably going to get diminishing returns by adding all those people onto the project. We're probably going to see an increase in defects. We're probably going to see a pushback in the schedule. Okay, so that's really important. Big benefit to what I'm going to show you, what I'm showing you, and what I'm about to show you. Another factor here is that it's very objective and it's very transparent, right? So when we're talking with the customer, we want to be as transparent as possible. As you saw in that case study, we needed to make adjustments, but we had everybody on board. They were all part of the team, so it was a much easier transition. And then a benefit to top-down estimation is it allows for rapid trade-off analysis and negotiation. I'm going to show you some live examples now. Going to open up my screen here. It starts here, okay? It starts with historical data. Remember I mentioned in one of those slides, capturing historical data, doing the data analysis before we do the estimating. And what I've opened up here is what we call the SLIM Data Manager, right? Software Lifecycle Management is what SLIM stands for, and the Data Manager is it's our repository tool. It's the place where we can capture some historical data and have some consistency to the way we report it and the way we capture it and the way we leverage it. And this is actually, our customers use this, and also, QSM uses it for our industry database, which is at least one of the largest in the world, maybe the largest of completed software projects. And so, here we go. We've got multiple tabs here that I could show you. Probably want to leave some time for questions, so I won't go to too much detail. But the bottom line here is, remember I mentioned Larry Putnam. He talked a lot about streamlining the estimating process. In fact, he wrote a book called 5 Core Metrics. In fact, there's a whole wealth of free articles and papers on our website, and there's a list of books. If you go to qsm.com at some point, there's a whole resources area, and there's a lot of papers and articles that are free that you can download. But he talked a lot about this, about streamlining to size and scope. In this example here, we've captured size. This is in function points, but this could be whatever we want it to be. It's flexible. So if we're doing Agile, and I know a lot of our clients are probably watching this, and they use user stories and story points and epics and features and things like that. Totally fine. Totally flexible here. So we want to be able to capture the size, and we want to be able to capture the duration and the effort that it took to deliver the work. And then once we do that, if we only had 3 things filled out on this screen, we could calculate what we call a productivity index, or this PI that I mentioned. Remember from the software production equation that I mentioned that Larry Putnam developed. Size, time, and effort to calculate this productivity index. Pretty streamlined, pretty straightforward. Now we're gonna leverage that in the estimating area. Okay, so here we are in the estimating tool, SLIM Estimate, and you can see, like I showed on the slide, at a high level, there's a navigator that provides, now I can click through them, the analytics you need to negotiate and to communicate effectively, all built in at the click of a button here. And what this big picture is showing is, and it's actually an Agile template for a Scrum team. Okay, and we can actually tailor this. In fact, let me show you another example now. This is a more traditional approach. This would be more of a waterfall approach. And you can see here, the gradual adding on of people and then people getting reallocated. And, we've got the concept phase, requirements, build and test and deploy, right? So traditional waterfall template along with the Agile template and anything in between. We can set this up for any client, for any type of problem we're trying to solve. And let me underscore that historical data that I mentioned from the data manager. We would load that in here, and then it shows up here. We can see our historical data on a scatter plot, so we can benchmark our estimate. So here on this particular view, we're looking at duration on the vertical, and we've got this blue data point here is my estimate for this particular project release. And then you see the trend line here. This is the industry average for our most recent Agile projects, hundreds of them, okay, encapsulated in this trend line. And then you could see these triangles here, that they're from that data manager that I just showed you, right, over here, right? So that's your historical data, projects that have been completed. So now, as soon as I run the estimate with just those 3 or 4 bits of information, I can see if the estimate's reasonable and if it's consistent with what other people are doing and if it's consistent with what we're doing. So these triangles could be your historical data. They could also be a vendor proposal, for example. Maybe it's a vendor bid, or maybe it's your proposal. Maybe you're the vendor. Another benefit of top-down estimation is it's hugely popular with people doing proposals, because usually when we're doing proposals, we don't have a ton of information going in, right? So this could be proposal, or you're the consumer of the proposal. So this could be a vendor bid right here. This could be a vendor bid promising you that you're going to get done in 3 months, right? Bring the crosshairs down. So remember that slide I showed on the impossible zone? That's what this is. So someone's given me an estimate, either in-house or a vendor has given me an estimate, and right off the bat, I can see if that estimate's reasonable. And this is before I've spent days or hours doing a very detailed bottom-up plan. I can see the big picture, the scope early and say, wow, okay, I don't feel comfortable with this vendor because, no one else has ever achieved that before. You can see the trend lines way up here. The work the vendor's done in the past, not consistent, right? So that's the power of using this historical data and the trends to make sure that we're on the right track. Now, finish showing you the big picture, then I'm going to show you how to run some estimates. But let me just explain this a little more here. I mentioned this is a deliverable. It's an agile project. And here it's telling us that we're going to deliver this in 10 sprints. And it's going to be about 4.7 months. You can see a little summary down here, about 6,700 person hours of effort, and it's going to cost me about $1 million. That's my estimate. And then, by the way, I wanted to get done in 4 months. It's telling me not going to happen probably about 4.5, 4.7. And the chance I have of getting done in 4 months is very small, about 5%. So I can look at the risk on the actual estimate to see if it's reasonable or not, if I should sign up to it. I can see that early, and then I can look at trade-offs. Like, for example, a lot of people will do something like, oh, hey, don't worry, we'll put more people on the project. Well, what happens? What's it going to cost if we add that Scrum team onto this project? How much will it cost, and will it help? So within a couple seconds, I add the Scrum team, and then I run a whole new estimate with the bigger team, and I can see, wow, okay, I'm going to save about a sprint and a half, and instead of, I'm going to save like 2 weeks, and it's going to cost me a lot more money. And you can see the ramp up of people there as well. So that's something I want to know before I make a decision, right? Another trade-off, because I mentioned in one of my slides, rapid trade-off analysis, right? Rapid risk analysis. Another trade-off might be, what's it going to cost when I add in the rest of the backlog? Let's take a forward-thinking view here. Let's see a forward view, and then within a second, just generated a whole new estimate with the backlog incorporated. It's telling me I'm going to deliver in 17 sprints. It's going to cost me about 3 more months, this much more money, right? And this much more effort. So it gives me the ability, these data-driven approaches, top-down, gives me the ability to analyze at sort of a bird's eye view so I can make good decisions early in the planning process. Now, I've kind of showed you some of these outputs. Let's take a deeper dive into what it actually takes to generate an estimate. I can reset. These are all estimates for the same release. When I click on one of these, it updates all of the views for this particular estimate. So I can go back to my original one. And then let's make some decisions, right? So we'll go here. We'll say, okay, let's run an estimate. And you see the dialog box that I showed on the slide. And you can see, wow, great. I'm going to put in how much work needs to be done and what my productivity index is so I can figure out how much effort I'm going to spend and how much it's going to cost me and how long it's going to take. I go back to the production equation that's directly tied to this, right? This is what gives us the flexibility. It's the mathematics underneath all the nice analytics that you see. And by the way, you don't have to be a math person to run this. You can be a high-level, very macro-level person, but that's sort of what's going under the hood there. I just wanted to give you a snapshot so you get a feel for it. So I'm going to put in how much work needs to be done. I'm going to put in that productivity index. Now I'm going to get the productivity index from my historical data, if I have some. If I don't, I'm going to use the industry database, and I'm going to get the industry average from my most recent Agile projects. Or if I'm doing some other type of project, I'll use that knowledge base. And now that I'm not on a slide, I'm actually in the tool now. I can take a little deeper dive here and say, okay, let's, I actually have more detail. I know how many features. I know how many epics, and I can break them out by complexity. So the more information you have, that's even the better, right? The more detail, great. But if I don't have this, that's okay too. But if I do, I'll leverage it, put in how much work, the PI, and then I'll make a decision. Oh, and by the way, if I'm not sure about this information, I'm going to say that I'm not sure about it. Totally transparent. I'm going to use a range here so that I can manage the uncertainty that goes into early estimating before we know how many hours each person's going to work, right? And then I'm going to make a decision. Do I want an estimate based on industry, or do I want an estimate based on my own historical data? Do I have a specific target that I've got to hit? Like, I've got to get this thing done in 5 months. Build me a project plan. Tell me how many people it's going to take. Or maybe I've got multiple constraints. I've got to get done in 4 months with 7 people, So it gives me the flexibility to look at targets and then see the risk on achieving those targets. So that's one approach. But remember, we want to be able to pivot. If I don't have that level of detail, then I want to be able to pivot to what I showed on that slide, more of a Rom estimating approach. And this is usually what we're doing on proposals or projects that we don't have a good understanding, we don't have a lot of knowledge of. So this would be one approach. Remember, we do know the scope here, so I'm going to go ahead and show you. So we'll put in the name of the project, the release, the phases that I want to include in the estimate, and I can change these names if I want. It's flexible. Start date, application type. Now remember, these are all knowledge bases. When I click on one of these, what it does is it brings in the typical cost and schedule and effort information from these types of projects so I can leverage them. This is huge, powerful, especially when I'm doing early estimating. And then I'm going to say, is this big or small? Is this a big project or a small project based on my experience? Now, here I'm using the industry database, but if I've got a little bit of my own history, you can tailor this for you. So when you say big, small, or large, or big, small, or medium, it's how you define big, small, and medium when I'm moving this. So this can be tailored to you. And then I'm going to put in that productivity index, right? That measure of efficiency that's calculated, that takes the subjectivity out of it. So that's one ROM approach. There's multiple that we can, based on the information we have available. So let's do more of an agile example, time box, right? The agile team is saying, oh, you know what, I'm okay. I already know what it's going to cost. And we're going to say, well, okay, let's just make sure you're on the right track at the release level. Now, remember, this does not replace all the sprint level planning that you're going to do, right? We're not in that. That's okay. We want you to do that too, but this is going to be telling you how many sprints do I need to deliver, or can I deliver, right? Or what's the release going to cost? So we're going to use a time box here. Oh, and by the way, remember, this is going to also tell us how much scope can be delivered within those fixed parameters that you might be telling me about. So I'm going to say, okay, name of the project, start date, application domain, type, right? Again, let me underscore the importance of this. This is really valuable. This is all that research that I told you about in that one of those first slides, the QSM database, right? All that research, we keep this current, up to date. And then the PI is going to populate, and then I'm going to put in whatever I have that's fixed, whatever my fixed parameters are that I'm set to, that I'm being told I have to do. And then I'm going to hit finish, and it's going to run the estimate. And it's going to bring me right back to this analysis area where I can look at different trade-offs and validate whether that estimate is realistic or not. So it brings us full circle, right? Remember, I showed you this earlier. Is the estimate consistent? Are the vendor bids consistent, whether it's in-house or vendor-driven? And I can see, okay, I'm feeling comfortable with this, or I'm not feeling comfortable with this. And by the way, this first estimate, right out of the box, maybe I don't have any data. Maybe I don't have any historical data. This first estimate would be my 50% shot, right? Let's just figure it's my 50%, 4.7 months. Now, if I have the luxury, I'll run another estimate again as I get further into the project. But if I don't have that luxury, I'm going to run a contingency plan right now and say, okay, give me the schedule and the budget that I've got a 90% chance of achieving. And then what I'll do is I'm going to hit next and finish, 2 steps. It runs the estimate and gives me an estimate that's where the risk is mitigated, or I've got uncertainty managed at a high level. And I can say, okay, great. Wow. Okay, here's a more conservative estimate, giving me a little bit more time and effort to deliver. And I'm actually going to save this because I want the 90% shot. And I'm going to save it. So now I have it to go back to when I'm talking to the stakeholders or I'm talking to the customer and say, well, I feel like this is our safest bet here. And this first estimate that we ran, this was a little bit riskier. And now we can make an educated decision, science-based decision going forward on the project that we're about to start, or maybe we're already in, or maybe we might already have started. Maybe we're just doing some early estimates. So that's that release level estimating planning that I mentioned in the slides. we're doing this also because we want to get a handle on our portfolio. So we want to have the ability to leverage this. The data analysis was step one. Using it on release estimates was step two. Using it to negotiate was also step two. And now I want to get the bigger picture, even the higher level, like the webinar says, to make sure that we're on the right track at the portfolio level. And we've got all types of analytics that we can look at for this. And I'll show you multiple examples here. This would be one example of, and this is our portfolio, and you can see it's broken out by different groups. We've got workflow projects, packages, back office, transformation programs, and you can see that on the Gantt chart here that the gray bar gives me the overall cost and effort and schedule for this, or duration for this particular group of projects, and this bar gives me the overall for packages for this group of projects. And then the blue bars give me the estimates for each release or each task, so I can roll them up, right, at a higher level. And then I can see the risk. All right, here's that slide I showed, but now it's live. I can see, wow, these projects here are hanging out. Maybe I looked okay on the portfolio, but I'm not looking okay. Or maybe I looked okay when it was by itself at the release, but at the portfolio level, they're looking risky, right? And we make some adjustments and see how, and try to make some data-driven adjustments. And then we can also look at, the staffing views, the effort by role by month. Here again, the developers are in purple. You can see as we're ramping up. And if it's saying, hey, we're going to need this many, 225 or 26 developers to deliver this, that's a red flag if I only have 200 on staff. But the key here is we can see it early, and we can make adjustments, and we can use it to do a data-driven decision-making approach. And I know I'm running out of time, but we can make adjustments, and you can see these automated tools actually roll everything up, and then we can see everything pretty quickly, so we can make good decisions within a reasonable amount of time. And then, I've got some other views here I was going to show, but I know I'm running out of time. For those folks that are working in microservices, platforms, DevOps, this is kind of an example of how we might set that up, where we've got the operations and the development team coming together early. Fits perfectly into our QSM approach, where we're trying to get everybody on the same page early, development team and operations, right, for early planning. And then here is actually some charts on another chart on more agile development. Here we're looking at program increments that we've rolled up for all of our agile development teams, and we've actually separated the planning and the architecture costs here. Deployment and training separated as well, but we can see them in the overall big picture plan. And that concludes my presentation. I know it was a lot of information in kind of a small amount of time, but I wanted to leave some time if there are any questions. So happy to answer questions for you as well.
Okay, we've got a lot of great ones. And if you want to hang out, we could go a little bit over our allotted hour, and just keep them coming. We'll get to as many as we can. And if we don't get to it, we'll just follow up and reply to you directly. So, and you can also feel free to use Keith's contact information up here too. So I'll start with this one. How big of a project typically uses this type of analysis? What is the payback or ROI? Does QSM fit with Agile? And this was, I think, before you showed your Agile example.
Yeah, great question. I mean, we have a ton of Agile clients using this on Agile projects, and you can set this up for really small projects, and also really large projects. And what we're trying to do with Agile a lot of times is we're looking at projects that might be, a few weeks or longer. And for more traditional approaches, projects that might be several months or longer, but totally flexible on either option. And what was the other part of the, did I answer all that, Elizabeth? Or there was another part too, right? Or do we use it on Agile? Yes, absolutely. Agile is very popular with us as well, with these models.
Okay. I know you said it, but I forgot. What does the PI mean? And I think there's probably a few people who could use a refresher on that one.
Yep, absolutely. The productivity index is an overall measure of efficiency for the overall project environment. So it takes into account things like skill level of the people, experience level of the people on the project, complexity of the software that you might be working on, Yeah, so basically it's an overall macro measure for the efficiency of the overall project, complexity, experience level, the team, process that you're in, how mature is the process. So the productivity measure is going to calculate based on historical data, taking into account all those environmental factors.
If we are using this software, is there no need to prepare the plan in MSP and Primavera?
Good question. No, I mean, we recommend using detailed planning tools as well as this top-down approach. So this would not replace Microsoft Project or Primavera, and it would not replace a PPM tool, which are geared for much more detailed, granular planning. What our solution does, and solutions like ours, is that it provides an early estimate, and also not actually. I didn't even get into it during the webinar, but we also provide analysis on in flight on projects, right? But at a more top-down macro level approach. And so no, it does not replace Microsoft Project. We actually interface with tools like that. Usually someone will use our tool Slim before they open up a Microsoft Project because they need to know, is this going to be 3 months or is it going to be 6 months before they figure out, well, how many hours am I going to assign to each person? Hope that answered it. Okay. Yeah.
Can Slim be used for SLOC?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the size inputs that you can use with Slim. So if you know how many lines of code that you need to deliver, you can certainly put that number, that measurement into Slim, and then we can figure out, how much effort it's going to take to deliver that. The reason why I mentioned some of the other measures is because with today's, with a lot of the Agile clients, they're using more higher level measures like features and stories and epics and things like that. But absolutely, the more detail you have, the better.
Is the quote unquote historical data estimate or is it actual data?
So the historical data can be both. I mean, it depends on how you look at it. So I was referring to it as a project that had been completed. But you can also enter in data on projects that are in flight, and you can actually calculate your productivity through, while you're in the project. And that's especially valuable when not only on in-house projects, but when you're dealing with vendors, right? A vendor comes in, you've chosen them, their proposal over 3 or 4 others, and now you want to track their progress. But again, not tracking at a granular level. We're looking at the, something a C-level or a senior manager or a project manager wants to see at kind of a bird's eye view. Like, is the project still on track to be successful? What's the productivity are they achieving? Are they going to be over budget? Are they going to meet the initial goals that they had promised?
What is the source of the industry database? Is it part of the delivered software, the Slim tool?
Another good question. I get asked that one a lot. So the source of the QSM database comes from the work that we do with clients by permission. So, right. So clients that we work with where we help them estimate or help them on a project where they know how long it took and how much effort was spent and how much work was delivered, they provide us with data on a voluntary basis by permission. Not everybody does it, right? Because there's a lot of confidentiality issues out there, and it's not a requirement, of course. But some of our clients like to work closely with us like that, and they like to see themselves reflected in the trends and things like that. So, but the source of the data is from client work that we do, both on a consulting and a tool support basis. And yeah, I think I answered the whole question there for you. Did I miss anything, Elizabeth, on that one?
No, I think that answered it.
Okay.
And I have had this question a couple times, and I forgot to mention that there will be a replay of this presentation available, and Keith can provide his slides for download as well. So I will send an email probably early next week with a link to the replay and the slides. So another question, is your software cloud-based?
Actually, that's a good question. We have a couple versions of our software. We have a desktop version or version you can install on a network, and we also have a web-based version that you would simply log in. We actually handle the hosting. You log in, and you can run your estimates from your own web instance. So very flexible that way. So multiple options to access the tools.
In terms of man hours, what is the typical size of project QSM is used on?
Yeah, that's a tough question because I don't think there's really a typical number because we've worked with, I guess you probably would not need to use Slim on a 2-day project with one person, right? That's not our scope. I would say, a month or longer is pretty typical for us. A lot of times 6 months or longer, right? But we do projects that are small, a month with a few people. We do projects that are multi-year, multi-million-dollar programs. So really, there's not a limitation there. It's you probably wouldn't need us though if you're one person working on a 2 or 3 day project. That's just not where you'd need all this model-based approach at that level. But we're flexible. Yep.
This is a good question. How can you determine if an underperforming project is caused by poor estimates or poor execution?
Well, we can tell because of the data. So we analyze the data and we see if the promises that were made were unrealistic from the start, and if the goals were realistic based on industry data and also based on the work that you've done in the past. And then we can take productivity measurements to see what your level of efficiency was, to see whether that had an impact as well, whether it was more of a skill or environmental factor, or whether it was just, I got the estimates wrong. So we can measure both. In fact, we do that a lot of clients hire us to do benchmarking work. They want to know that type of information. And so they hire our consulting team to do that type of analysis. And then there are other clients that, purchase our tools, and then we help them do analysis, on their own, kind of teach them how to do it.
Can I insert my historical data in the tool? Is it easy?
Yes, very easy. So yeah, that Slim Data Manager that I mentioned, that's where you would put your own historical data. And I mentioned Larry Putnam and the books that he wrote, right? Streamlining 5 core metrics. So yes, so estimating in general is not an easy thing, but what we're trying to do is make it easier and more data driven and give you the ability to negotiate more effectively. And so, yes, we would ask you, or you would try to put in 2 or 3 bits of historical data into the tool. If you don't have that, that's when we would leverage the industry data. We'd put more weight on that, and we would use the models to help manage that risk, that uncertainty. But yeah, you put your data directly into the tools, and you can calibrate the models to the way you do business. That goes to that slide where I talked about customizing to historical data and your project environment. Absolutely. Good question.
Do you offer on-premise installation? Do you offer trials?
Yes, we offer both. We offer on-premise as well as off-premise installations, and we do offer trials. We have a 60-day pilot that's really popular, and we include the training and the support. And you don't need to travel, which is great, especially for these times. We have a live class, live instructor, online, instructor-led, and then the support is online as well, instructor-led. So once you take the class, we actually get online, and we can, if you have some estimates coming up, we can get on there and help you with them.
How do you know when and which software to use on a combined basis? I think they are probably referring to the suite of tools.
Okay, yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to go into the whole suite, but so Slim Data Manager is the one I showed first. That's for your historical data. If you have some historical data, and let me clarify that by saying, a lot of people do not have historical data when they start working with us, right? So we can start working with you at whatever level of maturity you are currently at. But if you have some historical data, you'd want to put that in the Slim Data Manager. You'd leverage that in the estimating tool, which I showed today, to help you tailor your estimates for work you've already done. we have a SLIM control piece that lets you do in-flight analysis, where you're tracking, you're looking at a dashboard of plans versus actuals, and it's actually re-estimating as things change. And it's actually recalculating that productivity index, so you can see how well you're doing, right? And then that information feeds back into the data manager once the project's done. And we have a tool called SLIM Metrics to do process improvement type of analysis. And we have a product called SLIM Collaborate, which is our web-based version of this, which has certain elements of that, mainly in the estimating and portfolio analytics area, where you can, which is easy enough to use. If you have people that maybe aren't well versed in estimating, you can go in and do high-level estimates and just log in and do it based on the analytics that are already there.
What kind of database are you using in benchmarking, i.e. Published data or your historical info from similar completed projects?
So we use both. So we use, if the customer that we're working with has their own historical data, we'll do an internal benchmark for them and let them see how they're doing compared to themselves. And we'll help them identify where any bottlenecks might be, or where they're strong. Quite frankly, if they're trying to win business, we'll help them promote themselves by saying, okay, you're strong in this area, that type of analysis. And we also have the industry database so we'll do industry benchmarks for them as well, so they can compare themselves to typical cost and schedule and effort numbers on projects that are similar to the ones that they're working on.
Do you provide distance learning training for individuals?
Yes, we do. Anybody that wants to get trained, we provide a program for you. And if you'd like to, I'm happy to talk offline. But yes, online, no travel needed, individual basis, or we also do public classes as well, and we do them almost every month. And then we're always happy to add a few if needed. Whenever there extra ones are needed, we'll add them in, and also we'll do customer site work, training, and consulting.
Can we incorporate a Primavera schedule with this software?
Absolutely. So we have a okay. So if the question is, do we have a push button to Primavera? We do not actually have a push button, right? But we have a very robust API that integrates to most project management detailed level tools that I'm familiar with. And so, yes, we could help you integrate Primavera to our SLIM tools very easily. Also, automated interfaces to a lot of the Microsoft Office suite, Excel, and Microsoft Project, and PPM types of tools as well.
Okay, so I think we have time for just a couple more questions now. And just so you guys know, I have a recorded list of all of these questions that have come in. And so I'll make sure that we follow up with every single one just to make sure everybody gets their questions answered. And I have your email addresses connected to your questions, so we can follow up with you. So let's see, I think we can do about probably two more. How about using the tool for low or no code business applications like ServiceNow, where there is a lot of configuring?
Absolute yes to that. We work with many clients that are not actually doing software development instead, or maybe they're doing integration work, but their sole purpose is to do configuration on software packages like ServiceNow. So yeah, if you're looking to figure out, what should it cost my customer to configure ServiceNow, we can absolutely estimate that type of work.
Okay, is this the last question? And once again, we have a replay available, and we will have downloadable slides as well. So, and feel free to follow up if you have any questions after the presentation. We've got Keith's contact information here, but you can always go just directly to the QSM website, and there is a contact button in the upper right-hand side of the screen. Okay, last question. Do you have a certificate course?
We have a certificate course. We do actually. We have a SLIM certification that we offer. Again, class online, and yeah, simple answer is yes, absolutely. We have a certificate course for the SLIM tools, if that's what you meant.
Yep, I think those are. I think I've gotten to most of the questions. There might have been a couple that I accidentally missed when everybody was coming in, but we'll make sure that we'll follow up with any that we missed. So thank you so much for all of these great questions. And Keith, thank you for fielding all of these questions. And once again, you guys can see your PDU claim code on Keith's slide if you are looking to claim PDUs for this presentation. And we host these on a fairly regular basis, so stay tuned. We'll have future webinars available, and I hope you can join us.
Thanks, Elizabeth, for moderating, and thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.